I'm Susan Fiske. I'm a professor at Princeton University in Princeton, New Jersey, and my research specialty is social psychology, and in particular I study social cognition, which is how people make sense of other people, and most specifically done a lot of work on stereotyping of different kinds.
And I'm Mike North. I'm a third-year Ph.D. student here in the psychology department, working primarily with Professor Fiske. And my primary research focus is generally on stereotyping and prejudice, but really focusing mostly on age-based prejudice and perceptions of older people, and particularly in the eyes of the younger generation.
More than most people think, stereotyping is a kind of natural, spontaneous process. So people categorize people just the way they categorize furniture or food or fruit or whatever, you know. And it's pretty normal to categorize other people just because that's one of the ways you cope with other people. And so somebody who stereotypes other people is not necessarily a raging, rabid bigot. The person is just dealing with convenient stereotypes and categories. And so usually when we talk about stereotypes, we're talking about the beliefs that people have about the category. Well, in the United States and actually elsewhere more than we thought, it's more common than we thought. The sort of default expectation about older people is that they're kind of useless and low status, and nice, well-intentioned, but not really very smart and with it.
The lay belief is that younger people may be particularly ageist just based on traditional intergenerational conflicts over resources. I think one philosopher, Joseph Esposito, which is a quote I use a lot, once said, "Most revolutions, to some extent, pit youth against old age." And kind of in that vein, the way we think about the perceptions of younger people, the perceptions of older people among younger people, is based on the way that the social structure of age and status is organized in societies. So the way predominantly the shape that it takes is this kind of curvilinear inverted U-shape form. So basically you start out kind of young, you obviously don't have much status as a child, even as a college student, work your way up, whatever job you have. By the time you reach middle age, you're pretty well established. And then unfortunately when you hit old age, you sort of start to tail off. There's this kind of expectation, a predominant expectation to abide by this age track. But what our research has found so far is that the expectation for older people to kind of peacefully step aside at the end of the track is disproportionately espoused by younger people. The reason being, at least we theorize, is that, well, who does it impact the most if older people don't kind of budge from the top of that curve the most? It's not the middle-aged people. The idea of middle age as being kind of high status, middle-agers kind of running the show in society, that's pretty universally legitimized by people of all ages, older, younger, middle age. But the idea that older people should step aside and retire or pass along their wealth is really kind of an expectation that's really pretty prevalent among younger people. And the reason being that, frankly, it denies the younger generation opportunities. It denies their ability to ascend up the curve. If an older person doesn't retire, that's money that could be used, or a position that could be used perhaps to create multiple positions for younger people to get their foot in the door. There can also be resentments toward older people among the younger generation, simply if older people just don't know when to kind of step aside literally from mainstream society. You think of an older person driving, that's a big pet peeve of people, honestly. Why are they still driving? They drive so slowly, they cause traffic. Again, it's that expectation to kind of stay out of way, make way. This is a more kind of literal form of that, but a literal way of moving aside, making a way for younger, abler people to kind of take their turn. Surprisingly, a number of younger people really resent it when older people try to use new technologies or even just listen to the latest pop music. I mean, these are things that aren't if an older person uses Facebook, you don't have to add them as a friend, but they don't even necessarily need to interact with you, directly. But at the same time, it still poses a kind of threat. And again, in line with our theory, it's this idea that older people don't really know when to kind of stay away from the territory that younger people now want to inhabit.
Even things like they shouldn't dress like young people. There are all these shoulds, in these stereotypes about older people. They're prescriptive, right? Why would you imitate, what is younger people's identity? Why are you invading our identity? And why do they care? So one of the sort of entertaining things that Mike did was to look on the web about what kinds of things people were saying about older people. It was shocking.
Yeah, shouldn't dance, shouldn't have sex. That's one of the more actually common things that you see. But also things like shouldn't use new technologies.
Shouldn't
really
use a computer. Why do they care?
It doesn't matter. It's not like the stock of computers is going to run out.
So, intergenerational tensions are inevitable. And, with most kinds of stereotypes, there's a tension between the subordinate group or the one who's victimized by the stereotype and the group that's imposing the stereotype. And, the really young people who have the most sort of vicious stereotypes about old people, they're not actually in power yet. They're kind of moving up the status curve. And middle-aged people are a little more, easygoing about it, because for one thing, their old age is on the horizon, But really the most uninhibited vicious stereotypes are from quite younger people who don't yet acknowledge that they will get there too someday.
Yeah, just go on YouTube and you'll see a shocking number of very angry young people yelling at the camera about older people.
Now, most of these people are not bosses in charge of hiring and firing, but they are potential peers or colleagues or co-workers in the workplace who can make things pretty unpleasant for somebody. So, there's a certain kind of workplace tension that comes from whether the boss realizes that you're continuing to advance and you're continuing to be valuable and you could learn new things if they want you to, and seeing a future for you at the organization. But then there are the peers, too, who can really make life very difficult if they ignore you and leave you out of things and don't clue you in on the sort of informal network of what's going on. So there get to be in-groups and out-groups, and in certain kinds of workplaces in particular, sort of technically oriented ones, for example, the younger people are likely to be kind of a closed group and not to include the older people. So that could be damaging. There are some things that decline with age, and those go by the name of fluid intelligence, which has to do with things like how quickly you can answer things, and how much you can keep in your head, like a phone number and an area code and a PIN and zip code all at once. That goes down with age. But what actually increases with age is knowledge and experience and wisdom, the ability to stand back and see the big picture. And so, the overall sort of condemnation of older people as incompetent and stupid is not right. Well, in the workplace, it means that older people get underestimated and people expect them to decline, their performance to decline, and for them not to be useful so much anymore as they get older and to be kind of pushed out. And there is a fair amount of discrimination against older people in the workplace, certainly with hiring, also with promotions over time. The evidence doesn't support that. The evidence says that older people are quite effective in the workplace, and in fact, performance at work does not decline. I think that people can understand that there are different ways of getting older, and that not everybody gets older in the same way. That wisdom and experience are extremely important. That older people on the job can delegate things that might require, say, physical strength or speed, and that they can focus on the things that they're particularly good at, which is knowledge and experience and just the ability to see the big picture of things. And also, I haven't mentioned there's a sort of more positive outlook too, and optimism, and not so much dwelling on negativity in the typical case anyway. Well, I think pointing out the knowledge one has accumulated and one's ability to adapt to changing times and workplaces, and reliability and conscientiousness, which sort of fit the stereotype of an older person as being well-intentioned, not flaky, not rebellious, sticking by the rules, so that you can exploit the positive sides of the stereotype about being well-intentioned and try to rebut the negative parts of the stereotype, which are about incompetence, and say, well, I would be good at X, Y, and Z, maybe not so much A and B. Partly because people are especially good at reinforcing their own stereotypes, especially when it suits them to do that, and when there are no consequences for being wrong. So, if you let an older person go, you don't find out how they could have done had they stayed on the job. And that's, they never find out the opposite. And I think the other thing, and Mike will go into this a bit, I think, is that people need to realize how much they need other people for the resources that they hold. And to the extent that an older person can show that they have resources that they're willing to share in a constructive way with the younger colleagues, then I think that can undermine some of these issues.
Just on the side of employers, these are very long-held perceptions that older people are not good with change, they're not good with novel things, and much in the same way that, for instance, doctors don't spend as much time aggressively treating illnesses of older people. The idea is that they're dismissed as part of the natural aging process. By the same token, employers feel that it's kind of a waste to utilize training opportunities for older workers, thinking, what's the point? They're not going to adapt anyway. So I think it's both the internalization of older employees believing in these stereotypes, but it's also employers buying into those stereotypes, that it would be not a very good use of time to try to combat them.
The boomer generation, of which I'm part, I think we're in massive denial of the aging process, because we were the generation that was going to be forever young, and guess what? It's not true. And so I think that denial means if you don't own the category, you can't then combat the stereotypes about the category. And so I think that's the biggest problem, really. To the extent people realize that they need the older people, they need them to stay in the workforce, they need them for their knowledge and their strengths, I think that will help a lot. And we need them not to be using Social Security too early, right? Because there just isn't enough of it. In France, for example, right now, there's a big to-do about the retirement age being raised. Well, our retirement age is already way above theirs, and it may go even higher, and that would probably be good, because there's a lot of evidence that continuing to work is good for you, cognitively. And also, it has a lot to do with self-respect. But there are other activities people can do that are useful activities, even if they're not paid employment.
The internet is really, kind of a chock full of younger people talking to each other. Not saying that only younger people use the internet, but it really is kind of a closed-off sphere, I would say. The
technology revolution does complicate the issue some, because, the internet has apparently every form of knowledge available on it, although one might wonder how reliable it is. And in fact, I think that's one of the things that older people have as an advantage, is that they might look up something on Wikipedia, and they might think, but wait, who was invested enough in this topic to write this initially, and who's invested enough in this topic to keep revising it all the time. And so maybe it's not the truth, it might be a version of the truth based on the people who care enough to rewrite this particular site. And so I think that older people, when they do use the web for information, and I think a lot of people do, regardless of age, they're more likely to take it with a grain of salt and stand back from it and think about, I keep saying the big picture, but that's really part of what wisdom is to have some perspective on it. And the other thing I would say is that what you can't get from the web is pattern recognition. The ability to say, I've seen this before. Yes, this is like that other time. Oh, maybe the solution to this is like what the other one was. And what I see in my work, and older faculty and younger faculty and graduate students and undergraduates, is that part of what people get more and more able to do the longer they're in the field is to recognize patterns, whether it's patterns of data, patterns of behavior, patterns of anything, and to be able to consider other things that were similar to that as in a way to solve the problem. And when it's the first time you've encountered something, you can't see those patterns. And I don't think you can get that on the web. You can't just type in, coworker who's a pain in the neck. That doesn't give you an answer. But if you've dealt with, over your lifetime, 20 coworkers who are a pain in the neck in certain ways, then you kind of say, oh, well, this person's like so-and-so, and I can do the same thing, maybe. Try that,
Academia certainly has its own problems, but in terms of an uplifting message for a workplace where you have older, middle-aged, younger people learning, working together, taking, the talents of each age group, you'd be hard-pressed to find an arena where that works better than here, I think. And I'm not saying, I'm obviously part of that, so that might sound biased, which is why I say it has its own problems. But in terms of age, I don't think you see, I certainly don't notice hardly any ageism or age-based kind of resentments of that you would maybe in other workplaces.
So you have the ability as a tenured professor, to work on what you're good at. Now, that's no help for somebody who's, unemployed and the same age. But I think the comfort you can take from it is that the ability to educate younger people, is true no matter what your profession is. And the ability to provide some perspective where you're wanted and needed to do that, is, I think, a message that older people can take comfort in. And even if one doesn't have a paid job, if one can somehow get by, one can offer an awful lot to a community because of the experience. There are all kinds of people who have, retired willingly or not, and who have incredible talents to offer to community organizations and schools and all kinds of volunteer activities where really in-depth expertise is needed, not just another pair of hands. And so I think that that's something that can provide people with continued stimulation and self-worth, another line for your resume while you're looking for the other job that you hope to get, so you don't just sort of stay home all day and feel bad, because you really can be helping people and make a big difference, especially in hard economic times.